This video is only part of an unpaid, unbiased, in-depth review from an average rider's perspective, so check out the rest in the link below at thegoodride.com. If this video helps, please consider subscribing and buying through our links, or even better, become a member on YouTube or Patreon. You'll get exclusive access to video review shorts as we test gear, along with a lot of other perks. So thanks for watching, and I hope this review helps. Welcome to the wide world of snowboard gear polyamory. I'm James Beastie, and this is the K2 Manifest team. Next to it is the Korua Otto and Jones Mountain Twin, two boards I'll be referencing here and there throughout the review to compare this to some other great all-mountain boards. I rode this primarily with Union Atlas and Burton Kendos. Got this in some decent groomers, not always clean and pristine, but definitely fun to ride, and some good powder. Again, not all time, but pretty fun. So I got a pretty good sampler of how this board will ride in all conditions. To give you a short summary, the K2 Manifest softened up this year, and it still has much more of the personality of the old K2 Manifest, only a little softer, a little more playful. It's still not quite like the Manifest team that I rode a little bit but didn't do a review. I didn't get it in enough conditions to really feel comfortable putting out a review, but it's definitely lighter, poppier, and more chattery than the Manifest of old and the new Manifest. This Manifest still sits on the more damp, aggressive, but still somehow poppy side of the all-mountain world, but somehow still is forgiving. And it's an easy board to get off your game, but it's a fun board to straight line with still. Not as fun as the old boards, but it's easier to butter, it's easier to play around. I felt more comfortable on moderate sized jumps than I did the old board. I think all in all, it's just a very good one board quiver, especially if you see all conditions, everything from hard, micro, bumpy snow, which it excels in over the Otto, but then does really well in soft, bumpy, messy snow like the Otto. Doesn't quite grip as much as the Jones Mountain Twin and doesn't have as fast a base, but it's damper when you point it. So all of these boards shine in their own way. It's just about what appeals to you more. And I think the K2 Manifest is a very recommendable board. Now, when it comes to sizing, I'm size 9, 185 pounds, and 5'10". This 59 felt really good. I'm kind of in between a 56 and a 59. If you want more speed and more power and you're close to my specs, then it's the 59. If you want more maneuverability, you're gonna hit more kickers and you're gonna play around in the park here and there, you probably want the 56. I could handle either one, and I just, the 59 wasn't that hard to turn quickly edge to edge and manage. So the 56 should be fine too. So it's kind of right there fit wise with the Otto 157 that works really well for me. Feels just a touch big, but I like it. And the Jones Mountain Twin 157 feels like a perfect fit for my specs. Now, when it comes to the shape, they call this directional, but as you can see, it looks very much like a directional twin. From tip to tail, it's very similar in shape compared to the Otto next to it, which is like a true directional board, but not tapered. You can see it has a much longer nose than tail with the Otto. And then the Jones Mountain Twin is much more like a twin, but still the nose is longer than the tail. They all have not much, but a little setback on side cut and a decent amount of setback on board. But all of these you can throw around and ride switch really well. The Manifest and the Jones Mountain Twin are much better at that than the Otto, but the Otto is still really good. When you look at the camber profile, it's kind of a long, mellow camber with a little bit of early rise in the tail and a good bit more in the nose. So it is kind of a directional hybrid camber, but there is lifts on either side. And on snow, you do feel that a little bit, but it feels closer to the Jones Mountain Twin, which just has the same amount of camber underfoot going past the bindings with a little bit of early rise and just a longer nose. And then you have the Otto, which is camber basically from the tail going past the front bindings and then early rise in the nose, like true directional camber in the way we've been defining it lately. And so what that does for the Manifest is it's just kind of sits right in between that Jones Mountain Twin and the Korua Otto, and it has this really cool feel that favors directional riding just a little bit more, but just does not slouch at all if you want to throw it around. It feels very centered between the feet. You can weight in and really drive hard off your front foot, and it won't be washy. You can ride centered, truly centered, and weight your turns evenly and it'll be fine, or lean hard back into the tail and drive out of the turn and it'll be fine. All three of these boards can do that. When you get off your game, the Manifest is pretty easy to skid a turn. It's just a little less easy than the Jones Mountain Twin, but both of those are fine for even a beginner if you want to, but it's more intermediate to experts, where the Otto's more for a stronger intermediate who's kind of getting close to being advanced. I think that's where that's better. And when it comes to edge hold, I thought the Manifest did a really good job. It doesn't have that disrupted grab in hard snow, but it does not grab at all in soft snow, and it felt very consistent in all conditions I rode. And when I did hit some hard patches with this, it was okay. It held an edge well. I'd probably rather be on the Jones Mountain Twin if I saw more hard snow, but still it's very competent, and it was right there with the Otto. You can see it's definitely got a mellower flex. I remember giving the Manifest, the old Manifest, a flex, and it just couldn't do this. And it's got pretty good give back. It's a little bit on the damp side though. The nose is very similar, and so is the tail. Let's compare that to the Otto. You can see the Otto is definitely stiffer, and it's more in line with the Jones Mountain Twin. However, this is definitely softer and has just a little more energy giving back, but not by much. But on snow, I would say the Manifest pops almost equally with the Otto. It takes a little bit more work, but when you do, it both pop a little higher than the Jones Mountain Twin, which is easier to access, but doesn't quite pop as much. But all three are very good when it comes to pop, and none of them are slouches by any means. And when it comes to buttering, the Jones Mountain Twin is the easiest for me. The Manifest second, and it has a little more give than you would think on snow. In addition, it has a little more pop than you would think on snow, and I really like that. Overall, it just had a very damp, rubbery kind of feel to it that you think won't pop well, but when you get into it, it pops pretty good. It's not quite like that Never Summer pop that I love, where you think it's gonna be damp and rubbery and maybe a little bit dead, and then you pop it and it just snaps. This doesn't do that, but it's a very predictable, very damp feel that really springs, and I like it. And when it comes to uneven snow and how these boards do, I just thought the Manifest was the best in terms of riding in all kinds of uneven snow. And obviously they all shine in good groomers. And the Otto can get a little cranky in that hard micro bumpy snow. The Jones Mountain Twin can get a little bit bucky and bouncy in messy snow and a touch cranky in hard micro bumpy snow, but overall it's a great all conditions ride. You just have to dial back your riding a little bit, but that's what you get for that lighter, poppier feel. And the Otto is just powerhouse when it comes to just powering through messy, softer, uneven snow, kind of chunder, that kind of thing. But the Manifest is the winner here. It just is great in just about any condition you want to ride. So I really like that. It reminds me of Never Summer in that way, that it can just kind of handle almost anything you throw at it. Now, when it comes to speed and base glide, the Jones Mountain Twin wins here over the Manifest, but it's right there with the Otto. It's got good glide, and when well waxed, it keeps its speed pretty well. Definitely on the upper side, but it's not super fast. This base was really well waxed. Thanks, Justin. But when it comes to dampness, even though the Manifest has a softer flex, I found that it almost hung in there with the Korua Otto that's much stiffer. It was definitely faster than the Jones Mountain Twin, although that has faster acceleration and better base glide, but not the dampness. Now, when it comes to turning and carving and overall turning experience, the Manifest is pretty quick edge to edge. I think of the three, even though it's a little bit longer, it was faster edge to edge. It was really easy for me to initiate a turn. Even in a 59, where I'm kind of in between a 56 and a 59, I really liked how quickly you could get this to turn. So if you like a quick turning board out of all three, this is the one. It was almost there with my Yes Basic on ink that I didn't put in here, but is kind of in that all mountain world, just a little softer, a little lighter, and a little easier to pop. Very similar pop though, but not a bomber, not damp like this guy. I really liked it, but once I got it on edge, it had a pretty fun turning experience. It's very middle of the road. It can point it really well, and it's not like the ultimate in pointers, because it does have kind of a mid-level side cut, but it can definitely straight line, no problem. But then you get into like kind of middle radius turns, it just really shines, and I love that. But you can circle carve with this too, and there's pretty good spring out of the turn. Out of all three, the Otto was my favorite. It's just a little wider, you can lay into it harder. It can do longer drawn out S-turns just a touch better that are leaning more towards a straight line, but the Manifest was more balanced. And the Jones Mountain Twin is definitely more turny than it used to be, but something happens with this where it's just not as fast edge to edge as the Manifest, but definitely faster than the Otto. And it is pretty rewarding on a carve, but I preferred the Manifest and the Otto a little better. Now, when it comes to powder, there's a decent amount of setback on board. With a 22.75 inch stance width, which is pretty wide for me, you can get 1.875 inches back from center of board if you set it all the way back. That's a little more than the Jones Mountain Twin, but for some reason, I enjoyed the Jones Mountain Twin a little bit more in powder. I don't know why. Maybe it's the spoon nose. It just has a better turning experience in powder, but the float was somewhat similar. But the Otto is well over 3 inches when it comes to setback on board, and I can use all of the setback because it's a narrower stance. It's like 3.25 or something like that with a 22 inch stance width. So I can get very close to my 21.5 inch stance width and get a lot of directional float, more so than most all mountain boards. So I think overall though, it's kind of in that average group for all mountain boards, where it has good float, but not amazing. And it definitely is better than most like true twins or directional twins with a centered stance and not much setback on board. So you get a little more out of this board than your average mountain freestyle board, and I like that. When it comes to ride and switch, this thing is great. I like the Jones Mountain Twin a little bit better there, but overall it's very doable, and you don't really feel that slightly directional hybrid camber where there's more rocker in the nose than tail. When I was on reference stance and riding this, only just a touch setback. So I think reference stance is like 0.5 inches back from side cut. And I just felt like it did really good, and I didn't really feel that difference. It was much better than being on the Otto, which you definitely feel that smaller tail and bigger nose and that directional camber. All three are fun ride and switch. I'd say the Manifest is very close to the Jones Mountain Twin though. Oh, and when it came to hitting little bumps around the mountain and getting air. I really enjoyed the Manifest team. I thought I wouldn't because of that damp, kind of rubbery feel, but when I went off little hits, it popped pretty well. It wasn't the poppiest of poppy boards. Like one day I rode the Custom X, and that thing's just a whole other level of pop from all three of these boards. But it's got a lot of other shortcomings, like full camber, and you know, it's very light and poppy, and it can be much more chattery, bucky, and bouncy than all three of these boards. But it did really well, and I really liked it. I felt like all three of these boards have a good ability to get air. They track well into a jump and land a jump really well. Well, the micro jumps I did. I am not going big at my age. Overall, I felt the K2 Manifest really has its own unique personality. I loved that rubbery, damp feel in all conditions. It's very smooth, very consistent, and always stays itself no matter what kind of snow you're riding in. I think if you want something a little more mellow, a little lighter, a little more easy to access, a little less damp, and you want a nice fast bass, you got the Jones Mountain Twin. If you want something a little stiffer, a little more directional, better directional float and powder, but you still want something a little more on the non-tapered double ender side, you've got the Otto there. But if you kind of want a combination between the two, something that can just ride in all conditions, has a decent setback on board, isn't too unforgiving, and you can point it with, but you can also butter with and play around, you've got the Manifest. Giving advice on YouTube is very difficult because I need a lot of info from you to actually help. So if you want real advice, fill out the Me Harmony profile in the link below so I can help you properly.